I am Ed Johnson, advocate for quality in public education. That's pretty much my tagline in all of my correspondence to the community and various other places. And the tagline is meant to communicate that I hold a deep, abiding interest in our public education systems and an interest in sustaining them and improving them, and to try to bring to the public some understanding about just how they can be improved in a systemic kind of way, and let this understanding be an alternative to the often um, efforts that effectively amount to dismantling public education, such as with charter schools. So that's pretty much my passion. Bottom line, I would say close no schools, okay? And the reason is quite simple. We can understand Superintendent Davis's intention to save money because, in fact, the APS really is in need to do that, okay? However, we mustn't be too narrow in our understanding as to what saving means, okay? Uh, Savings, what we have to understand is that every school is within a community, okay? And there are relationships between the school and the community. And if you just abruptly pull out a school, there will be consequences to that community, okay? Now, granted, the schools are not fully occupied, okay, but there are potential solutions that can get around that and save disrupting the schools and save disrupting the communities, okay? For example, the idea of saving $6.5 million by closing schools, well, actually now is down to uh, $5 million because the number of schools targeted for closing has been reduced from 13 to 10. Okay, so a savings of $5 million. Well, that that savings really is a drop in the bucket. Okay, and it is predicated on the idea to close schools based upon their fixed capacity. Now, this is important. Fixed capacity. What's an alternative? To maybe invest in turning the schools into variable capacity schools, okay, such that as the student population increases or decreases, whatever, okay, adjustments can be made to the physical facility itself to accommodate the enrollment in that school. So that's one idea that I think the school board and the superintendent really should explore. In my professional work, it is about dealing with systems, okay? And very often while we use that word, we really don't quite understand what it means. But a system, you see, is more than the sum of its parts, okay? It's more than the sum of its parts. And to the extent that you get your parts working together, they come out to be something far more valuable than the sum of their parts. The idea of closing schools just to save money is to treat a school as a part independently of the system to which it belongs. And that gets you in the long run. While you might realize some short-term savings, in the long run, it's going to get you. Okay, so that's what I mean. So yes, you're right. We need to really understand what we can bring to the meaning of savings, because if it's too narrow, we would do great damage to especially communities that really do need to recover from the damage that was done to most of our children by the Hall administration, which, by the way, is something that I really tried to get people to see was coming from a systems perspective, okay? And well, the message just wasn't heard. We have to also recognize that, yeah, these schools were put in a community, but then the community grew up around the schools, okay? They created these connections with each other. And no matter what the legacy that led to creating all these mini schools, okay, um, from the civil rights era, Yeah, that legacy is there, but the fact is that the communities and the schools over time develop a symbiotic relationship, okay? And that symbiotic relationship needs to be taken advantage of now, okay? Not later, not by closing the schools or transferring kids to other schools, okay? That will sever the symbiotic relationships that these schools have with the communities. Again, especially where it is so important to really start undoing the damage that was done to these kids under the Hall administration. What is the purpose of the Atlanta public school system? Okay. One of the things that I did some years ago was to ask each school board member, what is the purpose of Atlanta public schools? And I got 9 different answers. Okay. So if the school board cannot answer the question, what is the purpose of Atlanta public schools, how is it that they can even think about participating in something as major as redistricting, let alone other problems? You see, if they don't have that purpose as a touchstone for when they need to make decisions, then why are they making decisions? Okay. If they are making decisions, the decisions are simply being made in a vacuum. Now, let's come down a little bit from the purpose of APS and talk about the purpose of individual schools, because each individual school does, in fact, like we've been talking about, has a symbiotic relationship with that community. The purpose of each of those schools should be one that reflects that symbiotic relationship, okay? And in addition, be reflective of the overall purpose of the Atlanta public schools. But the problem is nobody's talking about purpose, okay? So without purpose, where can you go, okay? You end up making decisions strictly on the basis of, well, we need to save $5 million. Well, how does that relate to the purpose of not only the individual schools, but to APS? So it has to start with purpose. And once you get your purpose, then you can maybe start saying, okay, what do we really need to bring in terms of resources to make this purpose a reality? Otherwise, you're going to be pulling in resources from all over the place. For example, Beverly Halls bringing in a lot of Gates money, $40 million, okay, to institute what they call the Effective Teacher in Every Classroom initiative, okay. Well, the fact of the matter is that that's not associated with any purpose for Atlanta Public Schools, okay. It is associated with the purpose of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So why are we doing that, okay? So why are we doing that? So yes, purpose at various levels throughout the system is very important. Parent involvement is a good thing, okay? Also a good thing is taxpayer involvement. It's not just parents, it's taxpayers. After all, that's where all the money comes from, taxpayers, okay? And also let's recognize that there's going to be varying levels of involvement. One of the things that the community, and I prefer community to encompass parents and taxpayers, can do is to start to understand and to articulate that they do have this symbiotic relationship between their community and the school system. And if you disrupt it, what are going to be the consequences to that disruption? Okay. For example, the Superintendent Davis in an AJC article today, and just to quote him directly, said, I am old enough to understand when you're making decisions, you cannot make everyone happy. I'll just make the best decisions I can make, and popularity in politics will have very little to do with my recommendations. And then he goes on to say, but all of my life, I've tried to do what's needed to be done and not worry about the consequences. That right there should trigger the community to say, to ask the question, well, why aren't you concerned about the consequences? Okay? So this is a very telling statement that ought to trigger community involvement, a community response, and I'm hoping that it will.